Chapter 9 of One Third Off. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Brian Ness. One Third Off by Irvin S. Cobb. Chapter 9. Adventure of the Fallen Egg. So having mapped out my campaign of attack against my fat, I rose one morning from my berth in the sleeping car, and I dressed. And firmly clutching my new-formed resolution to prevent its escape, I made my way to the dining car and sat down and gave my order to the affable honor graduate of Tuskegee Institute who graciously deigned to wait on me. Now, theretofore, for so far back as I remembered, breakfast had been my heartiest meal of the entire day, with perhaps two exceptions, luncheon and dinner. Precedent inclined me toward ordering about as many pieces of sliced banana as would be required to button a fairly tall woman's princess frock all the way down her back, with plenty of sugar and cream, and likewise a large porringer of some standard glutinous cereal, to be followed by sausages with buckwheat cakes and a few odd kickshaws and comfits in the way of strawberry preserves and hot buttered toast and coffee that was half cream, and first one thing and then another. But Spartan-like, I put temptation sternly behind me and told the officiating collegian to bring me plain boiled prunes, coffee with hot milk and saccharin tablets, dry toast, and one dropped egg. The prunes and the coffee were according to specifications, although lacking the customary cream and 3 lumps of sugar, the coffee was in the nature of a profound disappointment. But a superficial inquiry convinced me that the egg was not properly a dropped egg at all. Here was a fallen egg, if I ever saw one. I was filled with pity for it, poor, forsaken, abandoned thing, with none to speak a kind word for it, and probably more sinned against than sinning, too. Perhaps there was hereditary influences to be reckoned with. Perhaps its producer had been incubator raised with no mother to guide her, and only the Standard Oil Company for a foster parent. And what would a New Jersey corporation know about raising a hen? Thus in sudden compassion I mused. To the waiter, though, I said, "There has been a mistake here, alumnus. The egg never was meant to be dropped. It was meant to be thrown. Kindly remove the melancholy evidences." He offered to provide a substitute, but the edge of my zest seemed dulled. I made dry toast the climax of my chastely simple repast. It was simple and it was chaste, but otherwise not altogether what I would characterize as a successful repast. It lacked, as it were. Let us pass along to noontime. Ere noontime came, I was consumed with gnawing pains of emptiness. As nearly as I might judge, I contained naught save vast hollow spaces and acoustics and vacuums and empty, echoing, neglected convolutions. Sorely was I tempted to relax the rigors of the just inaugurated regime. Nobly, though, I resisted the impulse. As I look back now on that day, I find the memory of my suffering has dimmed slightly. The passage of weeks and months has served to soften the harsh outlines of poignant recollection. What now, in retrospect, most impresses me is the heroism I displayed, the stark fortitude, the grandeur of will power, the triumph for character. Sheer gallantry, I call it. For midday meal I had more dry toast, a reduced portion of boiled tongue, and a raw apple. Satisfying enough to some, I grant you, but to me no more than a tease to my palate. Long before 3 o'clock I knew exactly how a tapeworm feels when its landlord goes on a hunger strike. Every salivary gland I owned was standing on tiptoe, screaming for help. Every little mucous membrane had a sorrow all its own. Each separate fiber of my innermost being cried out for greases and for sugars and for the wonted starchy compounds for to stay it and for to comfort it. I underwent pangs such as had not been mine since away back yonder in August of 1914, in the time of the sack of Belgium, when the Germans locked up 5 of us for a day and a night in a cow stable, where no self-respecting cow would voluntarily have stayed, and then sent us by train under guard on a 3-day journey into Germany, yet all the while kept right on telling us we were not prisoners, but guests of the German army. And at the end of the 3rd day we reached the unanimous conclusion among ourselves that the only outstanding distinction we could see, from where we sat, between being prisoners of the German army and guests of the German army was that from time to time they did feed the prisoners. For throughout the journey the 8 of us, since by now our little party had grown, lived rather simply and frugally, and, I might say, sketchily, on rations consisting of 1 loaf of soldier's bread, 1 bottle of mineral water, and a 1-pound pot of sour and rancid honey, which must have emanated, in the first place, from a lot of very morbid, low-minded bees. However, in those exciting days there were many little moving distractions about to keep one from brooding o'ermuch on thoughts of lacking provender. I boast not, but merely utter a verity, when I state that every time I shook myself I shifted the center of population. Where we had been, the lesser wild life of mid-continental Europe abounded. In the matter of a distinction which had come to me utterly without solicitation or effort on my part, I have no desire to brag, but in justice to myself and my boarders, I must add that at that moment, of all the human beings in Central Europe, I was the most densely inhabited. My companions scratched along, doing fairly well, too. But I led the field. I was so much roomier than any one of them was. But here, aboard this Pullman, on this dedicatory day of my self-imposed martyrdom, I could not lose myself, as I had on that former historic occasion, in the ardor of chasing the small game of the country. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon I could appreciate the sensations of a conch shell on a parlor whatnot. I had a feeling that if anyone were to press his ear up against me, he would hear a murmuring sound as of distant sea waves. Yet, mark you, I held bravely out, fighting still the good fight. This, then, was my dinner, if such it might in truth be called. Clear soup, a smallish slice of rare roast beef cut shaving thin, gluten bread sparsely buttered, a cloud of watercress no larger than a man's hand, another raw apple, and a bit of domestic cheese, nothing rich, nothing exotic, no melting French fromages, no creamy Danish pastries. Only when I reached my demitasse, which I took straight, did I permit myself a touch of luxury. I lit my cigar with a genuine imported Swedish parlor match. Followed then the first comforting manifestation, the first gratefully registered taste of recompense for my privations. I had to speak that night, and in a large hall, too, and I found my voice to be clearer and stronger than usual, and found also that I spoke with much less effort than usual. I was sure partial fasting during the day was bearing fruits in the evening, and I was right, as subsequent evening experiences proved to me. I had rather dreaded that hungry gripes would make my night a sleepless one, but it didn't happen. I may have dreamed longing dreams about victuals, but I tore off 8 solid hours of unbridled and, I dare say, uproarious rest. End of chapter 9, recorded by Brian Ness.